Hi, folks. This is a bit intimidating. Normally, I speak at conferences and I'm speaking to people who don't know anything about data and AI. And obviously, you guys know much more about probably data and AI than I do. So I'm going to talk much more not about what it is, but what I think it can do. These are just my personal opinions, which is why I'd really appreciate some ideas back and a conversation around it. I have spoken to a lot of people about it. We are obsessed with it at Zappi. We're now privately equity, mostly privately equity owned. And they're also obsessed with it, as you can probably imagine. So I have lots and lots of conversations about AI, mostly with people who don't know what they're talking about, like myself. It is that old analogy that I'm sure you've heard, which is, it's a bit like teenage sex. Everyone is talking about it. Everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, and no one really knows what they're doing. I was at the Web Summit in Lisbon last week. They had a couple of days. One was all about AI. One was all about SaaS and marketing. And that was really interesting. One of the people did stand up and say, you do realize the only people making money out of AI is NVIDIA. And I thought, well, that's sort of true. But unlike, as AJ was talking earlier, and he was mentioning, we've gone through the internet, we've gone through mobile. I don't know about you, but I think that we had at least 5 years which were years of the mobile. We were like, this year is definitely going to be the year of mobile. And so was the next year, and so was the next year. My guess with generative AI is it's going to be a lot quicker. So the way it's being adopted, not just by us as an industry, but if you talk to and listen to private equity companies, VCs, if you talk to investors, if you talk to, frankly now, CEOs of large corporations, they are piling into generative AI. It is not little bits, little baby steps. It is piling in. They are absolutely, we were talking about this yesterday, there are two things going on at major enterprises, which are all our clients in terms of generative AI. Two things. One is they're incredibly excited, and the other is that they're incredibly scared, mostly of legal and data slippage. So this revolution is going to happen, I think, a lot quicker than the internet and a lot quicker than mobile. The good thing is, compared to most audiences I speak to, is I don't think the people in this room are going to be anything other than have their career improved significantly by it. I think lots of people who are in the normal market research world will have their career less significantly improved by it, but I'll go through that as we go. So the revolution is here. The revolution is here. We've heard some of the technical capabilities, but what it means in terms of being able to write market research reports. SurveyMonkey came out this morning. They have a generative AI module which allows you to write your own questionnaire. We've all seen that multiple times, but that was another launch this morning. I don't know how many other companies have launched the same thing, but it's probably 20 or 30 in the last 3 to 6 months. It is happening all across the research process. I'll talk a little bit about that, but again, you're probably pretty aware of what is going on. I think, Jerome, there was an element of your slide right towards the end in terms of generating concepts, generating advertising. Again, there was a lot of stuff talking about generating ads using generative AI. The impact that will have, I think, on the marketing industry generally, on the clients of the marketing industry who are making ads, and on our industry in terms of testing and helping refine ads, is going to be very profound. My guess is that the video, particularly the video tech, is not ready now, but it will be in 6 to 12 months. So that will have an enormous impact in the world of marketing and advertising. We at Zappi have been talking about AI for ever since really the founding. It's not to do with me and the original idea of Zappi, but you may not know, I knew nothing about technology. Still, many people claim I know nothing about technology. But we ended up working with another company called Intellection. We ended up merging with that company. That company had built a system that Kantar used, which created market research reports. And it used an old-style generative AI. not generative AI, an old style AI, which was a if that then this type model. So we always had AI within our system. We are moving from that style to a generative AI model, which is a lot better. But it's something we've always thought about. This book, I'd highly recommend, written in 2016, I think. It is all about thinking how AI will impact the professions. I'm sure they're in the midst of updating it. But there's also, if you can't be bothered to read the book, there's a really great video on YouTube of them presenting to Google. It's about an hour long and it covers the whole thing. But so I'll just read this quote. The end of the professional era is characterized by 4 trends: the move from bespoke service, the bypassing of traditional gatekeepers, the shift from a reactive to a proactive approach to professional work, and the more for less challenge. All 4 of those are massive trends within our own industry. So our own industry, the consumer insight world, whenever I talk to investors, I always say it's an analog sort of craft world where we start off with a project and then we try and craft it perfectly for that particular situation. And actually what Zappi has tried to do is just scale everything and not craft at all, but standardize and systematize. That's the trend we've ridden. And actually it puts us, I think, in a good situation from a generative AI perspective. But these trends are just going to have a huge impact on what happens in our industry, and that is exactly what AI will do. Again, you've probably seen something like this slide. So this is the capabilities of GPT 3.5 versus GPT 4. And again, it's really just to emphasize the speed of change that is happening in this world. So I think GPT-3, when it was given the American bar exam, came in the bottom 10%. GPT-4 came in the top 10%. That is going from the bottom 10% to the top 10% in about 6 months. So that is a staggering level of progress. And if you look at the new models, particularly in terms of visualization and in terms of video, they are changing incredibly rapidly. So when we can, one of the impacts of that is I think a lot more of the marketing activity is actually going to happen within the client rather than within the traditional agency environment. And that will have, again, profound impact on how we work as an industry. I'm glad that he is now CEO of OpenAI. I did this slide this morning. Obviously, I had to change it from yesterday. AI will cause the price of work that happens in front of a computer to decrease much faster than the price that happens in the physical world. Now, that is, for the Association of Survey Computing, where most of your work happens in front of a computer, that is a scary prediction. As I said, I think if you're working in the base level of data, I don't think that's problematic for us, but it is massively problematic if you write market research reports for a living, because the price for that work is going to significantly decrease and is significantly decreasing now. When I first did this sort of presentation, which is in March, I didn't have this slide in because it was pretty early. Everyone was going, oh my God, generative AI, what on earth do I do with it? Now, lots of people have worked out what to do with it and they're going to market with solutions. So I was talking to a company called Automated Creative, interestingly, who are just generating ads for their clients. And they're working with a bunch of different clients and they're generating ads instantaneously off the back of, which is why I was talking to them, social media data rather than survey data. So I was suggesting that survey data might be a more appropriate data asset to use. But they're generating digital ads on the fly, multiple of them, that can then go out into the market, be A/B tested in terms of their interaction. No survey research involved in the making of those ads, sadly. But that sort of stuff is just coming, and there's a wall of it coming down the pipe. And I'm not going to go through each of these because I think it's probably pretty obvious to all of us now. Desk research, we've just had an intern in that did desk research for a presentation we're doing to the board next month. Probably got done in 3 days what it would have taken me 3 months when I was a grad to do. It's just incredibly quick. Proposal writing, if you've seen the Microsoft Copilot, which I would absolutely recommend to do, one of the things it does, it's still in beta and apparently doesn't work that well, which is always very good news. But it looks across your entire corporate infrastructure, finds every aspect related to a particular client, takes that data and writes a proposal for that client to introduce the new software. So it can do all of that on its own. Now that is days, if not weeks, of work of a senior executive, and it's instantaneously gone. Hypothesis creation, I think, is a really interesting space, and I'll talk a bit more about that because I think for us in this room, the data that we have access to is the thing that will power that hypothesis creation. So actually, I think that's a key aspect of where we can go as an industry. Research design, I think we've seen that, projective exercises, concepts, etc. One of the things when we think about all of these aspects of research and the impact of generative AI and other forms of AI on it, we should start thinking more about one of the experiments I've been trying to go through myself is if you recreated market research in a world of generative AI, and very specifically in a world of synthetic data and generative AI, what would you create? So how would you reinvent the market research world, knowing what you know now and with a tabula rasa, right? With a complete blank sheet of paper. And I think there are two key thoughts from my side that I've had on this. One is that we ask a lot of what questions. How old are you? You know, do you drink this thing? These sort of behavioural questions, which, frankly, there's a bucket load of behavioural data sitting out there. And if we don't know it for that individual, we can certainly use synthetic modelling to apply it to that individual. So I think what you would do is massively reduce the number of questions that you ask. And then secondly, and I think much more importantly, and it's very good for the Rubik Lab sponsors, is that you would primarily use open-ended questions. So what we're moving towards is much more of a chatbot interface. These large language models, the clue is in the name, they're not called large data models, they're called large language models. They're very, very good with language. They like language, they like analyzing language, they like using language to generate ideas and to write reports. So we're certainly experimenting with cutting down surveys very significantly using synthetic data for the what stuff, and then chatbots for the why have very short, much more short questionnaires related to specific instances. That's the sort of thinking we're going towards in terms of how we could reinvent the world in a world of market in a world of generative AI. And then obviously get the AI to write all the reports, etc. And increasingly have the interactions with clients, which is interesting. So I think that's one of the things that we have to go through. There was, and I can't find it since, so this may be apocryphal, but just because it's a fun story. I was reading something about the birth of market research. So this was, it was a study done by Reader's Digest in the 20s or early 30s, where they were looking at different types of questions. And they said there were two types of questions. There's closed-ended and there's open-ended questions. Open-ended questions, they looked at it and they worked out how insightful each one was. Turns out open-ended questions significantly more insightful than closed-ended questions. But this is the 1920s, closed-ended questions are machine readable and open-ended questions were not machine readable. So the whole industry has gone in the direction of closed-ended questions. And you think about a grid, these brands by these attributes. I mean, for me, it's an awful question to answer. But it's also very specifically not related to how I think about a brand. It's related to how you think about a brand because you're asking me those scale questions. Whereas if you just say, Steve, what do you think about this brand? I will tell you, and you'll get much more insightful stuff from it. Well, it turns out now that those answers are machine readable. So let's stop asking closed-ended questions. So I think for the industry as a whole, it becomes a really interesting time. So you do get to this world of abundant insight because we can use synthetic data, we can get an awful lot more data, an awful lot more quickly. And one of our biggest problems has always been speed. So as marketing becomes much more agile, as product creation becomes much more agile, in an agile 2-week sprint period, they want consumer insight. People always want consumer insight. Why would you not want to know what your consumers think about the thing that you are generating, right? But you have to be able to give it to them in the time period that they're working in, which means you have to be entirely agile. Now we can be that. So we can generate this stuff very quickly, we can give them the insight, we can embed it in the decision-making process. This is disrupting, digitizing, democratizing, and demonetizing insight. The price of a research, just check SMR numbers on this, right? The price of a research study in the last 20 years has gone down and down and down and down. And it's only going in one way, and that is down further, in my view. So the price of getting insight is going down significantly. I think at the same time, demand for that insight is going up significantly. So that just changes the business model, the way you work within it. I'm going to speculate here, and I could be entirely wrong, so I'm just going to speculate on how I see the world of research, particularly at the client side. I've already said I think more and more is happening at the client side in terms of marketing. My guess is that's also going to be true in terms of insight, but there's still obviously a lot of roles within the agency. I do speculate a bit about the agency future. I really don't know. And it's one of the things I'd love to find out what other people think. So I talked. I tried to come up with an analogy, so you're just going to have to bear with it. It's what it is. I came up with this analogy that there are sort of research architects who are overlooking the entire system, designing things, designing systems, having a macro view. In big companies, it would be the global insight team, right? And then the owners of the insight, these are the people who are working directly with the clients who, our biggest client is Pepsi. It's the Doritos person in Romania talking to the marketing team in Romania, making sure that they're getting the right insight at the right time. And then builders who, in my head, is a research ops type department, which often doesn't exist, but increasingly we're seeing our clients adopting this role and building up this role. So at the moment, I think most big clients look like this. Very small COE, a very small sort of level of architecture, lots more very reactive. Marketing client comes along and says, I want to do this test, can you go off and do it for me? Or I need to know this data, go off and do it for me. Go and find me what people think of my brand. Very reactive. And then little to no research ops. My guess is that this section becomes just more and more important, as does the top section. So the architecture work of what does this macro framework for our data and our data asset becomes much, much more important. The bottom level of managing the data, making sure that things work together, their data is integrated, etc., becomes much, much more important. And this level, which is where most researchers are now, becomes significantly less important. That's the bit that goes away, and these are the two that come up. I think this base platform level of base data. The other thing that is spoken a lot about in terms of at the Web Summit last week and generally is that AI, in an AI world, you have sort of three things. You have the algorithm, you have the training data, and then you have some sort of UI. The algorithms, frankly, we're not going to fight about them. No one in this room is going to build one. The algorithms that are worthwhile are going to be Llama, GPT, blah, 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 right? So there's going to be 5 or 6 of them, but who really cares? We're just going to point them at data. They're already trained on a data asset, but if you are Pepsi, you want to take that algorithm and you want to train it on your Pepsi data. Right? Now that data may well be operational data, it may be science, sales data, it will be CRM data about what retailer is doing what thing to what type of product and what ordering system. But if you are generating new advertising ideas, new product ideas, new ways of going to market, you need consumer insight into those decisions. So at some point, that data layer is going to need the ingestion of consumer insight data and need the ingestion of consumer insight data at scale. This is the world that I think we need to play in. That world, in order to play in that world, our data needs to be harmonized. It needs to be accessible. It needs to be, I'm coming up with an algorithm, Jack, just so you know, at some point. Anyway, so we need to be able to to put through an API data into that system. There was someone at, sorry, I keep talking about website, it was just there last week, from Pepsi who talked about the fact that she ran digitization of Pepsi, never heard of market research as far as I could tell, but was digitizing the entire, helping to digitize the entire company. She had hired 2,000 developers this year, and in her plan, she was going to hire 2,000 developers next year. Think of the impact of that, right? I mean, that is huge. 4,000 developers, do you think there are 4,000 developers in the consumer insight industry? I don't know. And that's one company. I was talking to Colgate-Palmolive the other day. They are building a UI that will sit on top of their data and a machine and a generative AI model. So they're building their own UI to create advertising campaigns. Think about the change that will happen. As I said, I think the most significant change is actually, I mean, who would want to run an advertising agency right now? I certainly wouldn't. So that will be enormously impactful in marketing. It will be enormously impactful in consumer insight. There is going to be a huge shift in the world and where the work happens. We still have a role that can be much more central than we currently have, which is being the people that funnel the right data into the right place within their data architecture, integrated in the right way, and advising them on how best to use it. The final analogy I'll leave you with is, I don't know if any of you read the Jeff Bezos letters that he sends to shareholders every year. They're always worth a read. There was one he wrote about, which was the chair. So Amazon, in every meeting room at Amazon, there is an empty chair in every meeting room. You're not allowed to sit in it. It's there, and it's there to make everyone think about the customer. So it's the customer's chair. So you're supposed to look at whenever you're making a decision, you're supposed to look at that chair and think, oh, okay, that is the customer's chair. I've got to think about the customer when I make this decision. My view, our industry should be that chair, right? Our data should be in every decision that large companies make. But the only way to get it there is to funnel it at a data platform level and help them understand how to access and utilize that data so it is available in that room. We've already had that quote. And so I'll leave you with that. That thought is not the strongest or the most intelligent of the species that survive, but the ones that are most adaptable to change. And that change is coming, and it's coming quickly. Thank you. I have no idea how I did on time.
I think you did very well. Hello.
So you can shout out questions or comments or ideas.
I have a question though. Thank you very much. I mean, fascinating. I have been playing with one of those softwares designed for qualitative research that have ChatGPT in the background doing the analysis. And first time I did it was quite recently, and I looked at the results and I thought, wow, they're pretty good. I probably would have said all of that. If market research software is using a small number of the sort of core models to generate this. What does that mean for differentiation between insights? Are we all going to come up with the same insights? And if so, is that a big problem? It seems like it could be a big problem, because at the end of the day, the computers are generating it. We give it to the clients, and they could go to anyone and get exactly the same set of insights. Does that mean we don't have a future in trying to be insightful because the computers will do it for us? Or could humans add a layer on top of it that adds further insight?
It's interesting. My personal view is that we should. So if you looked at the 1990s in the research industry, we spent a lot of time creating an IP model. Honestly, we do a slightly different regression analysis to you, and we come up with a one-number score, which is slightly better than your one-number score. And are we still we're still partly in that world. I don't think that's a particularly interesting world to be in my view. I think particularly with machine learning, you should have dynamic models that aren't static algorithms with a one-number score. It should be much more dynamic. So I'm not a big fan of that world. I think it is much more important to ask great questions, preferably in an open-ended way, of consumers, and feed that data into decision-making happens real time. And so we compete on different things. Instead of competing on that model, we can compete on the speed, the way, the sampling, the quality of the sampling. I mean, Jesus, if we've got a problem there, right? So there are a lot of other ways that we can compete rather than those models, which were always, they were always proxy models, right? So they were always, we can predict sales with our algorithm better than someone else. Well, why not just pull in sales data and then do it automatically on the fly? So I'm not sure we should compete around that. I think we should do something else.
Yes, JT.
Thank you very much. JT from Delineate. Thanks, Steve. That was a really great presentation. I've been lucky enough to be at a few research AI-inspired events recently, one at SMR as well, which was really good. And some of the big research groups are now sharing what they're doing. So Jerome mentioned Ipsos, looking at Ipsos Facto and how AI supports that research process. Kantar have a stronger view, it seems, on synthetic data. So I'm going to ask you about synthetic data in a moment. And the concept of natural data collected from real people versus synthetic data. A question for perhaps later today about whether that's a new industry nomenclature we want. So my question really is about data collection. A lot of people in the room here have been in data collection for some time. The software, the technology we use processes that data. I agree with you on some of the open endpoints, but closed questions aren't going away. Can you talk about how Zappi is considering synthetic data, how it might replace some or all of the data collection of respondents, and what that might mean for our industry?
Yeah, I think synthetic data is really interesting. As I said, I think there's if you try and download the data that panels know about their respondents, there'll be 200 data points that they'll know something about for some people, but they won't know for most people. And actually using synthetic modeling to fill that out, so I know whether that person plays golf or likes cricket or whatever, reads The Economist. So we can synthesizing that data is great. I think even if you could get really good synthetic data that says I can predict really accurately, let's say 99% with certainty, whether people will like this new product you've come up with. Right? Let's say you could do that. My guess is no client would ever believe you, because they've just created something new. And so obviously they don't think you can guess how popular it's going to be because it's new. Now, we know that they're often deluded and it's generic, but that doesn't stop them believing that it's new. And so any system is trained on the past and so can't predict the future if you think you've changed the paradigm. And my guess is clients always think they've changed the paradigm.
Yes, Phil.
Hi, Phil Sutcliffe, Managing Partner, Next Intelligence. Less a question, more viewpoint for you to respond to, really. I was pleased to hear you say that you think the future of research is going to become more open-ended, because that's what we do. We do conversational research. And I've been sort of banging on for a little while about, particularly in the world of synthetic data, I think the future of quant is to become qual, or more qual-like at scale. But then I potentially disagree on one of the things that you said about the price of research going down, or at least a portion of it, because in that world where we're asking for more people's attention, not mindlessly ticking boxes to think and tell us and have conversations with us, I think that might lead to a rebalancing of participant engagement. You know, in that world, we need to make sure that we're not speaking to bots, that we're speaking to real people, so they need to be validated. We probably need to reward them more for their time. Just wanted to know what you thought about that.
No, I agree. But so if you take the price of a typical research project, the price to the client of a typical research project, and I don't know, let's call it 10 grand. Price of ours would be a lot lower, but let's say it's 10 grand. What proportion of that is actually the data collection piece? I don't know, maybe 10%. Now, let's say that 1 grand becomes 1,500, which I agree with you, it should. We should reward people better. We should have better quality incentives and better quality respondents. Actually, you could probably ask them a fewer questions, so maybe you don't have to increase that. But the other 8.5 grand is part profit and then a lot of people doing a lot of stuff that is not necessary in this new world. So that goes away. So even in the world where your work becomes more valuable and costs more, the overarching price to the client could still go down significantly.
I think Grace had a question. Hello, Grace from Northstat. We're a data collection company, but we also have a consumer panel across Europe. So our panelists are so used to the quant survey, online survey, closed-ended questions. So your idea of, asking more open-ended questions, it's very kind of interesting. And I wonder, how you would educate our panelists to kind of more, because they are so used to answer closed-ended questions. And, if you ask them to answer open-ended questions, do you think that this will deliver quality data to you, and how engaged they will be? And how do we shift this mindset? And what do you see at the moment, with your studies?
Yeah, I think, so we're doing a lot of experimentation in this area. I can't remember, we found it 40% more insightful, something like that, using a chatbot interface. The thing about the chatbot is that you can hold them to account a bit. So if you say, what did you like about this advertising campaign? And a typical open-ended, and you say, the colours, and they move on, and you go to the next question. That's what we've trained a lot of our respondents on. I mean, the level of depth and detail we get from standard open-endeds is tragic. But if the chatbot then says, that's interesting, tell me more, and you go, actually, I really like the mauve and the pink, and you say, what was it about that you liked? And you actually have a conversation with the person. I think it's probably a lot more engaging. It's hugely more insightful. But going back to my point about grids, it gets rid of, so the time you need to spend as a respondent, I think, could be significantly shorter. So you could do a 5-minute survey, not a 10-minute survey. Is it different? Yes. Do we need to be careful? we spotted a response to one of our open-ended questions the other day, which was, as a large language model, I'm not prepared to speculate on that area, which is a little bit concerning. Because obviously, maybe we need to do what professors are doing now, which is look for spelling mistakes in essays, and then they assume that they're real. But I think it's changing the way we ask them, making it much more conversational. I think that makes it more interesting. It depends where people. So I'd love to also experiment on this. Where are people taking these surveys? So do we need to make them voice rather than text? So if you're doing them on the go, maybe we just have to make them a voice conversation, and that again can be really interesting. But I think for most respondents, if you say we're going to give you the same incentive, if not more, for having a really good conversation with us for 5 minutes, rather than a really dull conversation with us for 10 minutes, I think they'll go in that direction. Will it require a change? Yes, but I think we could manage it.
Steve, I just want to point out, we have got a feature for that now.
No, good to know, good to know.
So I'm just joking, really. I work for Steve, but we have got a feature for the LLM response now, even though it's an arms race, of course.
Hiya, Jack Wilson from 2CV. I was just wondering on your thoughts on introducing generative elements within surveys. Obviously we're sort of heading into a period where we'll have things like Copilot. People will become very used to using generative AI on a day-to-day basis. What would be your thoughts on introducing, generative art or generative text, or having participants being able to sort of enhance what they're saying by entering a prompt and having that be fed into the survey in some way?
Yeah, I think there are two sides to that. One is that chatbot interface, which is generating questions. That would be generative, and I think that's really interesting. I think the much more extreme version that someone was talking about was let's say you're evaluating a concept or an ad, and let's make it a static ad just to make it easier. And you say, oh, I don't like the colours; it's too blue. And so it changes it to being yellow, and you go, does this work better? And they go, well, actually, it's a bit cold, and so you make it a brighter yellow. And they go, yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was trying to say. Now, that's really interesting. The capability of doing that, I mean, I wouldn't want to hit GPT that often and bank on it working that quickly, but that's coming. So that will be really interesting. I don't know how you then amalgamate all those responses, because you end up with, 200 different ads from 200 different respondents. But it's a really interesting area to experiment on.
Just one other quick follow-up question to that. In terms of, obviously you've said that you feel that open ends are more insightful, and I would generally agree with you on that. But if you're collecting open-ended questions at scale and kind of getting a lot of different qualitative information, it can be very difficult to sort of have consistency, particularly if you're letting AI have some agency in the way that it sort of follows up and goes into more detail. So you may end up with quite a lot of pretty unmatched data. So in that way, I would sort of question how you'd be able to have if you are getting rid of coded questions, how comparable you could have the data at scale. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, it's something we're experimenting with. I think it's really interesting. But the weird thing behind your question, right, which is what I've had the same conversation internally, is that what you're saying is I want to know less, right? I want less detail from these consumers about what they think, which is a scary world to want to go into. I would say it's much more important to say, yes, you differ so much that you're going to tell me very different things, and somehow I'm going to analyze that to make it interesting and useful, rather than go, okay, I'll just go with really basic level insight because that's more easy to deal with, which is exactly what we did with closed-ended questions. So I think we have to dive into that diversity of opinion and make it worthwhile somehow.
Somewhat of a leading question, but you're describing a philosophical journey towards a slightly different type of data gathering process, aren't you? And that very skill of soliciting a conversation with an individual to get them to talk about things, are you recognizing that as a skill, and how you design a survey as an art form that we need to cherish perhaps a bit more going forward?
Yeah. I mean, so I wrote a blog post about why researchers should become prompt engineers. And actually, what we are good at, I think, is we want to understand human beings. We think about questions, we think about question design, and we think about answers and analyzing those answers. And so I think compared to people who own other data sets, so if you think about people who own social media data sets or CRM data sets or sales data sets, they don't have those skills, right? So we're the people with those skills about really wanting to have a genuine, insightful conversation with consumers. Does that mean we need to change? It does, but I have confidence that we have the skills that enable us to go on that journey.
Okay, we've got time for just 2 more.
Right. I just wanted to touch on a point that Jerome made earlier about validating the information that is coming out of these models. You're throwing all this information at it, and you mentioned earlier that the desk time it takes for a graduate to do this. Are you still letting them validate it and comparing their research to the model, or are you just, at some point, when do you let go and let the model be the single source of truth, as it were?
So there was a lot of talk about, 6 to 9 months ago about hallucination of these models. They're hallucinating less and less. And there's a lot of work about model validation. So there was a whole presentation from some company talking about basically getting all of the output, and it's regenerative tagging of some form, but it basically says, this is what I've come up with. This other model says, I'm going to try and prove what you've came up with has a source. So it's models balancing against each other to try and prove the original data file and where and explain how it came up with its answer. Frankly, it's out of our pay grade, would be my guess. But my gut is that problem is being solved pretty rapidly.
Just follow up from that one. How are you certain though that the 2 models are correct? Because they could just both be spouting the same problem, the same lie, as it were.
It's definitely possible. I mean, the truth is, we supply data to companies making decisions about marketing. It's not life or death. If they're wrong 5% of the time, oh well, they'll survive. I think what's more important, it's a weird thing to say in a research audience, it's less important is 100% accuracy, and more important is the ability to deliver insight to people making decisions in the time, in the place that they need to make decisions. And I think people accept margins of error. I mean, we've always had confidence intervals, and it's effectively the same. As long as we're trying to reduce that, as long as we're trying to reduce the lack of quality in our consumer panels and all that sort of stuff, as long as you're continuously working on the problem, I don't think it's such a big issue that you would stop using that tech.
Thanks, Steve. Matt from Bayes Price TSAPI. I think you gave us a twist of optimism there with the Acme Corporation, where the backroom data grinders finally come out of the cupboard and take our rightful place as kings and queens of the world. So you gave us a couple of clear examples there of that happening. I first saw you present that hypothesis about 12 months ago, IEX Amsterdam. Are you seeing that now everywhere you turn, or are these still one-off occasions?
I'm seeing it more. I'm definitely seeing it more within clients. I mean, we're having this conversation with clients, whether they're setting up research operations divisions in India or they're setting them up in the States or whatever. It definitely is the trend. How quick it's catching on, I don't know. But yeah, I am seeing that playing out. Otherwise, I'd have changed the slides.
Thanks.
I just have one final one. I'm intrigued about the future of the people within the industry, particularly people perhaps who are starting in the industry. If a 16-year-old was asking you advice, desperate to get into market research, I'm not sure many 16-year-olds are, but and they said, what should I study? What skills should I adopt? What would be your advice?
I'd probably say either get into data or think about maybe becoming a personal trainer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. Really great.